I have the privilege now of interviewing, or rather, I'm doing too much radio show, apparently, of introducing Mr. Tim Norbeck, who is the CEO of the Physicians Foundation. And although he probably needs no introduction, he has had 49 years of working with and for physicians in the interest of healthcare. He spent 6 years with the AMA. He spent 4 years as CEO of the Rhode Island Medical Society, 29 years of the Connecticut State Medical Society, and he's in his 10th year of the Physicians Foundation. Mr. Norbeck has spoken on behalf of physicians in all 50 states, authored numerous articles and op-ed pieces and letters in many state and national publications. As a physician's advocate, he will discuss the pressing issues for doctors and how we can work together to restore autonomy and satisfaction in the medical profession. And his speech title today is, "Your destiny is still in your hands, but the clock is ticking." Mr. Norbeck.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks very much. Won't need that. I'm just going to put that back. Good morning. My name is Tim Norbeck. I'm a physician freedom fighter, have been one for 49 years. I'm proud of it, and I apologize to no one for it. I live in Southwest Florida, where an 82-year-old man was recently charged with slashing the tires of an 88-year-old woman's car. Her egregious act that set him off, she took his favorite seat at their weekly bingo game. And you think you've got problems. I'm lucky to be here today. Had it not been for a first-rate diagnosis and a first-rate surgery on a deadly melanoma on the top of my head 2 years ago, I would not have the opportunity to speak to all of you stand-up physicians who want merely to practice medicine and take care of your patients without the regulatory red tape tsunami and without the strong arm of excessive intrusions of government and insurers. But there's not a lot of sympathy out there for you. I recall the words of Lou Holtz, who cautioned people to remember that most people don't care about your problems and the others are probably glad you have them. When I look back over the past 49 years and see the untenable positions physicians find themselves in, I'm nauseated. A burgeoning number of physicians, especially those in small private practices, are so under siege today that they feel like the state of their medical practice is running about 2 plagues behind biblical Egypt. I saw a letter recently in a British publication that is as dispiriting as it is relevant to physicians today. "Look here, your lordship," it began. "You've broken my business, you've ruined my home, you have sent my son to prison and my wife to a dishonorable grave. You have seduced my only daughter. But be careful, Lord Fitzwater. I'm a man of quick temper. Do not push me too far." Does that not describe the state of private practice today? I know of no better way to characterize the feelings of American physicians today than to relate to you a true story from about 200 years ago. The U.S. federal government sent General Benjamin Lincoln to negotiate a treaty with the Creek Indians. The chief greeted the general and asked him to sit down next to him in the middle of a long log. After sitting down, the general was asked to move over. In a few minutes, the chief asked him to move still further down the log. This request was repeated several more times until General Lincoln reached the end of the log, whereupon the chief said, "Move further." The general, clearly annoyed by now, responded rather angrily, "I can move no further." "Just as it is with us," said the chief. "You moved us all the way back to the water and you told us to move further. We cannot and we will not move further." Isn't that how you and your colleagues feel today? The time has come for regulators and insurers to occupy a seat on that log. Speaking of the Creek Indians, I'm reminded of an exchange between a United States senator and a representative from an Indian reservation back in the early 1920s. The Indian, who was from Oklahoma, testifying before a Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, stated, "I've come before you, gentlemen, to plead for the right of my tribe to manage its own lands." "I object," said the senator, "on the grounds that the average Indian hasn't the intelligence to manage his own property." "Why, Senator, do you think that I haven't much intelligence?" asked the Indian. "No, I said the average Indian," replied the senator. "You can't be average. your tribe undoubtedly would send the smartest man they had to plead their case. No, sir, he said. We Indians are just like the other people of the United States. We never send our smartest and best people to Congress. I want to congratulate and pay tribute to two stand-up physicians whom I greatly admire, Michael Strickland and Dan Cravioto, who have made this conference possible and given us all a chance to not only discuss the many grievances, and there are many, but to also offer the opportunity for like-minded physicians to come together and find solutions to them. Why does the Federal Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality test 2,167 metrics? Yes, 2,167 of them, promoted by more than 100 organizations. You've got a Tower of Babel, admits David Blumenthal, now president of the Commonwealth Fund. According to Bloomberg Business Week, Dr. Blumenthal oversaw a report 3 months ago by the National Academy's Institute of Medicine that found attempts to rate care have unleashed a multitude of uncoordinated, inconsistent, and often duplicative measurement and reporting initiatives. Truly a mess, but physicians must comply with them. Why do they impose such confusing and numerous metrics on physicians? Should medical technology be allowed to displace the human touch of medicine?
Go to the head of the class
said that our
by admitting
technology
patients,
must never
ordering tests,
exceed our
prescribing
humanity.
drugs, and
Tell that
performing
to the
procedures.
regulators. Why do physicians and their offices have to take on that near Herculean task of converting from 14,000 codes under ICD-9 to roughly 69,000 codes under ICD-10? It is an incredibly expensive and burdensome process for already beleaguered physician practices, as you know. Why? In order to qualify for a Medicare bonus, an important thing, obviously, inasmuch as Medicare payments to physicians are declining, a physician must have an EMR system up and running. As my good physician friend Rip Hollister from Colorado Springs laments, it's stupid and makes no sense why we physicians are forced to be box checkers. That kind of stupidity reminds one of a George Carlin saying, "Think about how stupid the average person is," he said, and then realize half of them are stupider than that. Medicare payment rates to physicians have risen just 3.6% since 2001. While practice overheads obviously have increased well over 20% during that period. Hospitals, incidentally, have received 35% increases since 2001. Despite the red ink and more practices struggling with low margins just to survive, the egregious new regulations keep barreling along. Why? The simple answer to all these questions is this: because they can. It's a long-time Washington truism that if you're not at the table, you are on the menu. Also a truism, physicians have been on the menu for a long time. But where's the physician voice in all those reforms? Their silence reminds me of an old Fibber McGee radio show, showing my age now, when Fibber complained that my wife and I had words last night, but I never got to use mine. But why? Could it be that Stephen Brill, author of the very interesting book, America's Bitter Pill, Money, Politics, Backroom Deals, and the Fight to Fix Our Broken Healthcare System, knows why? Brill reports on page 154 of his book that the SGR fix, which had been originally promised in the ACA legislation, was put off for some future date in separate legislation. Now the macro legislation, incidentally, the Physicians Foundation has a number of brochures on that macro legislation available to you if you want to see it. That decision, Brill suggests, was emblematic of an important dynamic. Listen carefully to this Brill quote explaining the inaction on SGR. The doctors, the players in the healthcare economy who with nurses actually provide healthcare had seen their influence evaporate compared to the big money industry stakeholders such as drug companies, insurers, and hospitals. As a result, they could be trifled with, let me say that again, trifled with, in a way that would have been unimaginable in the Truman era, when they had almost single-handedly torpedoed reform. And then he drops the guillotine with this final sentence on the subject. They just didn't have that clout anymore. But I don't mean to paint too dismal a picture, because there are some things we can do about these inequities. Whenever I get too distressed about what is happening to physicians today, I remember the observation of Navy Lieutenant Paul Galante, an American hero and a man I'm proud to call my friend, who spent nearly 7 years in the infamous Hanoi Hilton as a prisoner of war. Paul was also the CEO of the Virginia Medical Society for several years after his release. He said, "There's no such thing as a bad day when there's a doorknob on the inside of the door." Doesn't hurt for us to remember those words. Incidentally, it was Paul who adorned the famous cover of Life magazine for its October 20th, 1967 issue, where he is seated in captivity giving his captors the bird. I won't do that, but you can picture it, with both middle fingers. And when they finally figured out what that meant, he was tortured even more. That was 48 years ago. And I'm happy to report that I spoke recently with Paul, and he's doing fine. His gesture was to let us all know in the United States and the world that his indomitable will, his spirit, his courage, and his determination would never be lost or even compromised. Let us embrace those sentiments as our own. On a smaller issue, but certainly illustrative of the overall lack of respect towards the medical profession, and undoubtedly a source of some physician discontent, is the impersonal and demeaning term used by insurers, government officials, health policy makers, and the media to describe all of you physicians as providers. I'm not disparaging other hard-working health caregivers, but they are not physicians. You are. You work long and hard to become and to be called physicians, and I resent every time you are referred to as a provider. And we let it happen. Like docile, unassertive, and compliant school children, we answered to the intentional pejorative term, the first of many future broadsides at your autonomy. Why did we permit it? How did we allow them to define you as providers? It is just another example of the overall lack of respect in physicians. You who labor so hard to identify and then help people through illnesses, injuries, and life-threatening challenges, such as my own personal experience. Among the other grievances, it's time to demand the respect that you have earned. Can you imagine the legal profession allowing such a slight, to be called legal providers instead of lawyers? Not for a New York minute, but we did. Over 150 years ago, the great abolitionist and writer Frederick Douglass observed that find out what any people will quietly submit to, and you have the exact measure of the injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. Sound familiar? While obviously referring to the effects of slavery, his words pretty accurately describe the political state of medicine today. The meek shall inherit the earth if that's all right with you approach doesn't work on our battlefield. So what do we do about your not having clout anymore? We need to influence public opinion. Abraham Lincoln said on a number of occasions that public sentiment is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. Public sentiment is on your side and always has been, but it has not in the past 50 years translated into political power. Some 31 years ago, during the last year of President Reagan's first term, I had the opportunity to participate in a rather small gathering of physicians with the then Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill. Although I have an honorary MD degree, and I'm proud of that, granted to me by the Connecticut State Medical Society, I didn't earn it the old-fashioned way that you did, or the physicians who accompanied me to the Speaker's office that day. Although Reagan and O'Neill could be bitter political rivals and very distant in their political persuasions, they had a strong mutual respect for each other and the elected offices they held. It had been a few years earlier when the president remarked at O'Neill's 70th birthday party, "Tip," he said, "if I had a ticket to heaven and you didn't, I would give mine away and go to hell with you." Speaker O'Neill, never that outwardly friendly to the medical profession, spoke to us about how effective physicians could and should be in advancing their agenda. "You physicians have no idea how much effect on public opinion you can have," he began. I know that you are unhappy with the government regulations coming your way. And I know that you feel very frustrated with the trial lawyers who seem to have your number on tort reform, that insurers are intruding on your practices. Why do you allow it? He asked. Don't you realize that the public, your patients, revere you and will listen to your point of view, whether it be a public forum, a school board meeting, a legislative hearing, or an editorial board meeting? People respect what you did in becoming a physician and why, he continued, and they admire you for what you do to heal them. Just how important is it to people to be respected? Probably all of you have heard about Ernest Shackleton's endurance expedition to the Antarctic 101 years ago. But you may not know about the brutally honest advertisement he placed in the London newspaper to secure a crew and prepare for that most difficult expedition. Men wanted for hazardous journey, the ad began. Small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, and safe return doubtful. Honor and recognition given in case of success. Sir Ernest was shocked. He couldn't understand, given all of the negatives and the warnings, the overwhelming response to his ad. As he later referred to that call for volunteers, it seemed as though all of the men of Great Britain were determined to accompany me. The response was so great. All this, despite the fateful words, safe return, doubtful. But in examining it further, it shouldn't have been such a shock to him. Honor or recognition in case of success obviously meant a great deal more to the multitude who volunteered than all of the warnings and the downsides. That's how driven people are to do something worthwhile, to be proud of oneself, to do something admirable, to be respected, to be recognized, and to feel important. Everyone wants that, but relatively few experience it. And yet all of that is indigenous to your profession, in being a physician, in helping patients, and feeling that you matter, and being looked up to, and achieving something important. That is what you are. That is what you do. You are physicians. You worked hard to be a physician. You will always be a physician. Even long after you've seen your last patient, no one can ever take that away from you. What Tip O'Neill said to us 31 years ago is still true. Physicians will help lead the discussion on important issues if you assume your rightful leadership roles that the public has entrusted you to do. I have a good internist friend who still practices in the small Connecticut community of Bethel. His name is Ed Volpentesta, and for any of you who regularly read letters to the editor as I do, and I see Gina shaking her head, I suspect his name is familiar to you. Like so many of you, he feels overwhelmed and underappreciated. But he continues to practice because he loves seeing patients and helping them through their illnesses. Ed is a prolific writer and a very good one. And he expresses his opinions regularly on medical issues to newspapers and medical journals throughout the country. I've seen his letters everywhere, often several times a month. Ed, I hope you're watching on the webinar. Ed told me it was his way of giving back to the profession he loves, and it also allowed him to relieve some of his steam, anger, and anxiety. It was his way of taking the mantle of leadership by speaking out on issues, rebutting and correcting when necessary, or just elaborating on what others have said. Timmy, as he likes to call me, where there are so many critics out there who don't have a clue what my colleagues and I do, but they are never hesitant to tell us what we should be doing. He always sounds the same in his letters. A caring and sincere physician who wants a better healthcare system so he can do the best for his patients. What a contributor he is to public opinion. He spends several hours a week churning out those meaningful letters in addition to his regular 60-hour-plus work week. And the editors publish them because they are always compelling. Ed Volpentesta is a one-man medical PR machine for the profession, and all of his writings are clearly from the heart. Ed is an example of a true physician leader. If you like to write, consider doing what Ed does. It will help more than you think. Incidentally, Ed's most recent letter sent to Newsweek was a scorching indictment of the infamous Maintenance of Certification Program, or MOC, where he also says, like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, this recertification controversy will forever stand as a symbol for all doctors to remind them of how easily their professional freedoms and their livelihoods can be threatened by the very institutions they created. Thank you, Ed. Years ago, when I became a staff member of the AMA in 1967, things were quite different. My boss was a close friend with Arkansas's Wilbur Mills, he of the later Fannie Fox fame, for those of you with gray hair, who was chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. One phone call from Aubrey Gates to Wilbur Mills could scuttle almost any bad piece of medical legislation. Back in 1934, when President Franklin Roosevelt introduced his plan for Social Security, which was passed the following year, he wanted to accompany it, as many people know, with a national health insurance program. There were various obstacles to the plan, but a major one allegedly involved a prominent neurosurgeon, Harvey W. Cushing, whose daughter had married FDR's son, James. In fact, his daughter was FDR's favorite daughter-in-law. Many believe that it was Dr. Cushing who had a lot to do with FDR abandoning the National Health Insurance Program. Just one of the stories was that Dr. Cushing convinced FDR that the physicians of America would not rally behind it. But the point is that those days of being able to make a phone call to a politician to scuttle legislation are long over. Strong medical societies and a strong AMA and concerted political action can help a great deal. Can you imagine the political power the AMA could have if all physicians were members? That needs to happen. But individual physicians, as Tip O'Neill told us years ago, can be enormously effective. The geniuses who want to impose ICD-10 on you and your colleagues have no clue what that involves for you, nor do patients. And it is easy for the so-called treatment experts in healthcare to standardize treatment protocols, but impossible, as all of you know, to standardize all patients. The philosopher Thucydides was asked by a fellow citizen, "When will justice come to Athens?" Thucydides replied, "Justice will not come to Athens until those who are injured, those who are not injured are just as indignant as those who are injured." Translated to our situation, we will not get relief from the oppressive and burgeoning regulations and red tape, etc., until your patients feel your pain. We must engage them in our protests and make them realize that their care is compromised by these harassments. We must remember what Claire Booth Luce said 75 years ago, something that rings true today. There are no hopeless situations. There are only people who have grown hopeless about them. She was not speaking about stand-up physicians like yourselves, but about some of your colleagues who are silent today and pessimistic. We must move them. The Greeks always asked when someone died, did he have passion? We need that passion, all of us, to get where we need to go, to make the policies makers listen to us. I know what many of you are probably thinking. How can I get more involved when my practice is operating on such a tight margin? And just like my colleagues around the country, I spend 22% of my time on paperwork, interacting with payers, dealing with formularies, claims, billing, credentialing, pre-authorizations, and quality measuring data. That exhausting effort costs every physician over $82,000 a year. Physician, author, and Fox News contributor Charles Krauthammer complained recently about the deep disappointment, almost demoralization, with what medical practice has become. The complaint, as he put it, was not financial but vocational, an incessant interference with their work, deep erosion of their autonomy and authority, a transformation from physician to provider. His physician colleagues, who have already left practice, all say they still love patient care and being a doctor. They just couldn't stand everything else. It's easy to resonate with comments made many years ago by economist Milton Friedman. If you put the U.S. government in charge of the Sahara Desert, he said, in 5 years there would be a shortage of sand. With respect to tort reform, which was not included in the ACA, no one argues that a truly aggrieved plaintiff victim of malpractice should be compensated. But 65% of all claims are dropped, dismissed, or withdrawn. 24% result in a settlement, and 8% go to trial. And of those 8%, 90% are won by physician defendants, but the average lawsuit takes 20 months to be resolved, a long time for the plaintiff, but an agonizing wait for the physician and his or her family. Perhaps the time has come to seriously consider the establishment of special health courts, which have been bandied about, with expert judges who have special training and expertise to help resolve these claims more efficiently and effectively. If they could successfully protect the plaintiff's rights and those of the physician, perhaps the hundreds of billions of dollars spent on defensive medicine to protect against possible suits could be lessened. Health Affairs reported in 2010 that defensive medicine cost Medicare and Medicaid alone $55.6 billion in 2008, 7 years ago. It's much higher now, obviously. Philip Howard of Common Good estimates the overall cost exceeds $200 billion a year. I remember being attacked personally by Ralph Nader in an op-ed years ago in the Indianapolis Star because I was deeply involved in hiring trial lawyers to file lawsuits against all of the major managed care insurers for their egregious behavior towards physicians. Since I also was advocating for tort reform on behalf of physicians, Mr. Nader, one of the trial bar's greatest advocates, accused me of being a hypocrite. I did not and do not consider the two incompatible. When we sued the insurers as a very last resort, after they ignored hard-fought managed care reform in state legislatures, what were we supposed to do to seek justice? Hire just anyone, a law student, to represent us? Mr. Nader's twisted logic reminds me of Willie Nelson's recent comment. He was upset by the criticism of Lance Armstrong. I think it's just terrible and disgusting, Willie said, how everyone has treated Lance Armstrong, especially after what he achieved. Imagine winning 7 Tour de France bicycle races while on drugs. When I was on drugs, he said, I couldn't even find my bike. While preparing this talk and remembering our friendly medical society battles with the trial lawyers over tort reform, I thought of the story that I used to tell at our meetings and conferences. It was about an obnoxious trial lawyer who was cross-examining a coroner. The attorney asked, before you signed the death certificate, had you taken the man's pulse? Did you listen for a heartbeat? Did you check for breathing? To each question, the coroner responded, no. And with each question, the attorney asked for the coroner's response in louder and harsher terms. So, when you signed the death certificate, the attorney continued to berate him, you had not taken any steps at all, had you, to make sure that the man was dead? You hadn't taken any of those. By this time, very tired of the browbeating, the coroner replied, well, let me put it this way. The man's brain was sitting in a jar on my desk, but for all I know, he could be out there practicing law somewhere. Sometimes things aren't always as they seem. What may seem to make sense doesn't make sense at all. The geniuses who imposed the 2015 digital deadline for EMRs obviously figured that if banking went electronic, why not medicine? They took the facts relating to banking and came to the wrong conclusion about its effect on medicine. While pleading a legal case before the jury, Abe Lincoln told a story about how you could have your facts right, but come to the wrong conclusion. He told the jury of a farmer back home who was sitting comfortably on his front porch when suddenly his 6-year-old son came running from the barn shouting, Father, Father, the hired hand is in the hayloft with Big Sister. He's pulling his pants down and Big Sister's lifting up her skirt. I'm afraid they're going to pee on the hay. Now, son, said the farmer calmly, you have all your facts right, but you have reached the wrong conclusion. We must remember that we have won several battles with insurers. State medical societies, as I mentioned before, working with their state legislatures, secured managed care reform back in the mid to late 1990s. HMOs learned that image was important, and theirs was taking a real beating back then. HMOs learned that they had to do something about it, and we can never underestimate the importance of image. The state of Oklahoma lost the business and revenue as the location site for the movie Oklahoma. It was a movie version of that beautiful musical Oklahoma. Why? Because it didn't look enough like Oklahoma. Apparently Arizona did. During that time when we went to state legislatures to secure managed care reform, I remember the National HMO Association going to the William Morris ad agency to help it get access to key writers, power brokers, and the Hollywood directors so they could create the illusion of a softer image, which they desperately needed. I remember a senior VP at William Morris stating emphatically that there's some great stuff that HMOs do. Well, like what exactly? Well, he claimed that managed care took care of 170 million Americans and saved many lives. Oh, really? I always thought that physicians and other caregivers took care of those patients and saved lives, not managed care. Silly me. His rhetoric reminded me at the time of the former mayor of Washington, D.C., Marion Barry, who commented proudly and famously that D.C. had one of the lowest crime rates in the United States. That is, if you don't count the killings. Another battle won over the insurers was the one where 17 state and 3 county medical societies brought a major class action lawsuit against the managed care insurers back in 2001. Dr. Walker Ray, president of the Physicians Foundation, and Rip Hollister from Colorado Springs were very, very much involved in that fight. As part of the successful settlement, the Physicians Foundation was created. Payback against the insurers was very sweet. Speaking of payback, I'm reminded of the married couple who had been in a terrible accident where the woman's face was severely burned. The doctor told the husband that they couldn't graft any skin from her body because she was so thin. So the husband offered to donate some of his own. However, the only skin on his body that the doctor felt was suitable would have to come from his buttocks. The husband and wife agreed that they would tell no one about where the skin came from. After the surgery was completed, everyone was astonished at the woman's new beauty. Her new cheeks glowed, and she looked more beautiful than ever before. One day she was alone with her husband and was overcome with emotion at his sacrifice. She said, "Dear, I just want to thank you for everything you did for me. There is no way I could ever repay you." "My darling," he replied, "think nothing of it. I get all the thanks I need every time I see your mother kiss you on the cheek." I do not want physicians to be chattel, bought or sold, intimidated and browbeaten, hired and fired, swapped and traded in a doctor auction. I do not want well-trained physicians to be victimized anymore in the rush to further the bureaucratization of medicine. I do not want physicians so engaged in box checking and metrics and complying with a tsunami of regulations that they have no time for personal interaction with their patients. And I do not want physicians to be forced into being computer jockeys instead of healers, nor do I want patients to be considered data machines. I do want physicians to be happy being physicians, who have the time and energy to go the extra mile for their patients. I do want physicians who feel good about their role in society, and I want their voices to be heard in all healthcare reform discussions. I do want physicians whose medical judgments prevail in medical decisions, and I do want physicians to be called physicians again. You've earned that designation, and we should insist on it. But we need to understand that the knight in shining armor is not coming. Not now, not ever. We will have to make things happen. No one else is going to do it for us. Policymakers and politicians must come to understand that in healthcare discussions, if physicians are not involved in the takeoff, they don't want to be involved in the crash landing. If we lack the stomach for this fight, future physicians and patients will rightfully be able to point their fingers at physicians and their medical organizations and say, "How hard did you fight for us? How much were you willing to risk for us? How determined were you to make the necessary sacrifices for us?" For the saddest epitaph, which can be carved in memory of a vanished liberty, as Justice George Sutherland said, is that it was lost before its possessors, because its possessors failed to stretch forth a saving hand while yet there was time. There is a time to unite and fight, and that time has now come. We may be fighting by ourselves alone, but we're not fighting for ourselves alone. Patient care is at stake. A mighty flame followeth a tiny spark, said Dante. Let this meeting provide that spark. Distinguished physicians, ladies and gentlemen, your destiny is still in your hands, but the clock is ticking. Thank you very much.
We're not done with you quite yet. Thank you for a very energetic presentation on a very important topic. And thank you for saying that this battle, although advanced, is winnable.
It is.
Thank you. And that's very, very important. So we're going to answer a few questions. If there's some questions from the audience or from the home audience, hopefully we can have those put up for us and fire away. Okay, this is for both of us, and if you feel comfortable with it, you can take it. Otherwise, I'll take it. Physicians have been labeled by the business role of commodity. We're still held in high esteem by the public, but our responsibilities in healthcare have been marginalized.
Well, I would simply say that, unfortunately, that's true. It's part of it is the media, part of it is our times. And physicians are. Reader's Digest, most recently. And some people have said, well, physicians aren't thought of as highly now as they were back then. That's not true. All the polls indicate that the physicians are, well, they rank behind nurses, but close behind nurses. Nurses are one, physicians two. And that's very consistent. Need more political action. We need the AMA to be more powerful and to have, right now, with a smaller membership, they don't have the clout that they did have. And we need them to have more clout. We need somehow for physicians to come together and be members.
Do you think that despite what happened in 1965 and again in 1983, as I referred to in my talk, that the AMA is the vehicle for that, or would it be an organization more like UPSA or AAPS, or one that has never wavered from physicians? Difficult question, and I apologize.
I take my hat off to both. In fact, years ago when I was a younger man, I used to write the cover story articles for the AAPS, way back. I also am delighted to be here. I think what Michael Strickland and Dan Cravioto have done, all of you speakers have been wonderful, every one of you. And I think this is a wonderful thing. I don't think that's Michael Strickland's intent to have the UPSA be that organization. I still think, now I know I was an employee of AMA for 8 years and I remain loyal to the AMA. I still don't see a better opportunity than the AMA. What I would like to see AMA actually do, and it's been bandied about, I went to 77 straight AMA conventions, and they were always interesting.
I think that speaks to your constitution.
But what the point I'm trying to make is you have, it's such a democracy. You have a physician from Wichita, Kansas, who's got a problem with bovine flatulence. And they will spend 2 or 3 hours talking about that, when that is of very little interest to people with the issues that are on now. I would hope sometime maybe AMA, it's not a criticism, just a suggestion, that the AMA might be able to have a House of Delegates meeting where they actually have 4 or 5 main issues of the big issues facing doctors, and not, I hate to say waste
government overregulation, maintenance of licensure, maintenance of certification, maintaining independent practices. Should I go on? Or
yeah, all of these things. But I think they could zero in on 4 or 5 issues instead of opening it up. And I understand why they do, and I'm not criticizing them or the doctors. It is a democracy. And somebody feels strongly about bovine flatulence. Well, that's great, but AMA House of Delegates probably isn't the right body for that.
Is that a pun? I'm sorry. I find humor in lots of things.
Yes, you do.
So, are there any further questions? Doctor, can you introduce yourself and then please ask your question, and either of us will take it depending on what the question is about.
My name is Waqas Khan, and I'm internal medicine and a hospitalist, practicing hospitalist in Illinois. This has been a very great speech, and you have covered a lot of issues right now prevailing in the medical society. And my question is like, the tort reform is the only thing that has not been addressed in the Affordable Care Act. How can the physicians really make the government consider this thing as something that needs to be placed as a reform, and so that the defensive medicine, which costs around $50 to $650 billion annually to the system, we can and has not shown any sort of better outcome in the healthcare can be addressed.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. If I may piggyback on top of your question and have Mr. Norbeck respond, that was supposed to be one of the AMA's big cards to play before anything passed through Congress or anything governed physicians was tort reform. And unfortunately, the AMA went in lockstep with the government and all of their policies and didn't walk away from the table when they got nothing that they wanted. I don't understand, and maybe you can help me understand.
I'm going to defend the AMA on that one, but first of all, Doctor, I commend you for the wonderful, important work you're doing. I think that's wonderful. I know the AMA has been very much interested in tort reform. We all are. And at the time,
shouldn't that have been a deal breaker?
I don't know. But at the time of all these discussions, where AMA felt and was promised SGR reform, which did not come through, as we know, they were also promised, as far as I know, tort reform too. There were going to be a couple of pilot projects. Ezekiel Emanuel was bragging in some of the news media things that the ACA is full of good tort reform. Well, there wasn't any of it. But it was at the last second. I think, I don't know if it was the president or the staff or whether the trial lawyers just jumped in. But I think it's unfair to characterize AMA as not caring or not being involved in that. They felt, as far as I know, that there would be tort reform, and it was removed at the last second, as far as I know. And that was terribly unfortunate.
And that does happen in the backroom dealings. Sometimes it drops out and everybody has to say they're for it, and then all of a sudden there's nothing in our favor. And
unfortunately, in today's world, with all the power brokers and all the political action money, I might add this, that probably trial lawyers average, probably each trial lawyer in this country gives $1,000 or more to political action. What do you think the average is for doctors? I'm guessing if you took all the doctors, the 850,000 doctors, added up all their contributions, it would come to about $10 a head. Forgive me for this, but when I was in Connecticut, we had a physician running for governor, Jerry Labriola, great guy. He was in the state senate, wonderful guy. And I ended up personally giving him half of what he actually got in the entire state. And he told me that his roommate in medical school sent him a check for $5. I mean, that is part of the problem. We need political action. AMPAC, everybody's got to be involved in AMPAC too, or your state medical societies. That's obviously important, but the political action groups there, very important.
We have one more question. Thank you, Dr. Khan.
Thank you very much.
We have one more question in 2 minutes remaining, and it's a question for you, I believe. The commonality of government, insurance companies, and hospitals are lobbyists who are allowed by politicians to write laws, scraping profits off the top for themselves. How can we correct that? Because that seems to be inherent in the current day, and perhaps it always was, but now it's apparent.
It's a great question. Marcy was saying yesterday how she knows Pete Sessions and others, and I know there are a lot of physicians. Dr. Garcia, who's president of the TMA in the back, who's very close to legislators and the physician legislators, representing Texas and Congress. We all have to be more involved. I mean, we can't leave it to our physician leaders who are presidents and of medical societies, as important as that is, but all of us have to be involved in political action. And I'm sorry to say, if we aren't, it's not looking good if we don't.
We're not at the table, we're being served for dinner.
Right. I can't blame AMA right now for us, a problem for physicians being at the table. I can't. I mean, we've got to support. Physicians have to be members. They've got to be members of states and counties. Many are dropping out partly because of the cost and their tight margins and their practices, and I understand that. But we've got to get together here.
Certainly. Well, I appreciate the time you've spent with us. Do we have time for more questions? We do. Okay. And certainly I appreciate that you have the opportunity to talk back and forth and take all of the hard questions, because I try to bring the things that I write and talk about. I try to bring everything that practicing physicians are thinking, but either don't have the voice or just feel repressed to the point where they're not comfortable. So I'm going to move on to the next question.
Could I just read this from Ed Volpentest, who obviously at Bethel, Connecticut, wonderful physician.
In fact, he's actually been published in Medical Economics several times, and I know Dr. Volpentest fairly well. Thanks for watching and writing in.
Eddie has been everywhere, and I see right now he's just sending in.
Right. He says, how about using distractions caused by insurers' regulations as a defense in malpractice cases when appropriate?
Well, certainly.
What's your thought on that? Again, you're not an attorney.
First of all, I think in all the years I've known Eddie, I've never disagreed with him on anything, and I don't disagree with him on this one. It is just so tough. The trial lawyers are so big. Consider again, I'll bet you that every trial lawyer in this country contributes a minimum of $1,000 for one reason: to get a legislator's ear and to influence and make sure that tort reform isn't included in legislation. That's what AMA is up against. We have to do our part, and I think we have to do that. Somehow we have to be a force that the trial lawyers are afraid of, and we're not there yet.
Do you see the AMA as being responsive currently to practicing physicians? Because we talked about the conflict of interest with CPT codes and the millions of dollars they make.
Craig,
and I'm just trying to get it all out.
Craig, I do. I know AMA has been criticized for a lot of things, and maybe there's some valid criticism out there. I know they care very much about physicians and their practices. I worked for them for 6 years, been involved, went to all those AMA House of Delegates. Probably the most difficult thing is when you are as big as you are, as the AMA is. Mm-hmm. You can't satisfy everybody, and there are reasons maybe that I don't understand that they didn't pursue something as aggressively as I might have, but I wasn't there and I don't understand it. But I can't necessarily criticize them for that. But we've got to have a greater membership in the AMA. We need a greater membership in state medical societies. Dr. Garcia in the back, Texas Medical's one of the few really good growing state medical societies in the country, associations in the country.
He'll be speaking in relatively a few minutes.
If I keep my mouth shut, Tom will be up here.
So we're going to take a question from Dr. Thompson, who's part of the UPSA.
This is not a question. We talked about this last night, and I think it's very important. My role as committee member for UPSA has been to kind of connect the dots. And I spoke at a local level, at a state level, at a national level, with our representative organizations, and few agreed to come here to engage in dialogue with us. I thank you for doing so. And I'm from Texas, and I'm very, very proud that Dr. Garcia is here. I did approach my local medical organization. They did not respond. It didn't occur to me to go over their heads and go straight to Dr. Garcia, but Dr. Garcia learned about this movement and came at his own initiative. I'm very proud of him. And then the next thing I'm going to do right now is very difficult for me and out of character. The UPSA group is a group of 4 physicians, 4 very fine physicians that have worked hard for over a year. Michael Strickland, Dan Craviato, Dr. Regina Malink, and myself, Dr. Judith Thompson. I don't think I want to claim any recognition, but on behalf of all physicians in this country who work to do what's right, I have to set the record straight. There are 4 of us and not 2 of us, and I say that with all due respect, sir.
Thank you. I recognize Dr. Held, who has apparently flown in from her ophthalmology practice in Texas. Welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate your talk. It was excellent. But I just have a comment. I don't think we can continue to feed the beast. I am concerned that the answer is always give more, keep feeding the beast, give our politicians more money. They've failed us and they've proven that. They don't need our money. They take our money and use it against us. And if you look at MACRA, they put $500 million in there to each year between 2019 and 2024 to redistribute among physicians for the MIPS, merit-based incentive payment system. And if you divide that by the 549,000 physicians who work with Medicare, that comes to about $900 a physician. So we'd give them $1,000, they'd give us $900 back if we do their bidding. I think that's wrong. I think that they're serving a higher calling, a higher power. They follow the money. This is not, they don't care about the patients. We must represent the patients, and representing the patients is not giving them money that patients don't represent us and don't represent them. And the AMA, if you look at the CEO and the leadership, they don't represent us, and that's why physicians aren't doing it. And I don't know that that's the answer. We do need a group. I'm saddened that we can't be in the AMA. But I'm not going to spend a lot of money for them to work against me, and I would appreciate anyone else's comments on that.
Could I? Thank you for your comments. And by the way, would you please avail yourself of the brochures on that we have? And I'd love to get your personal feedback whether you think that's good. I'm not suggesting that political action is the answer to everything, and I'm not suggesting that every physician pay $1,000 like the trial lawyers, but it does open a door, and if that's and that isn't the only way to open doors, to give them political contributions. But we can all reach out a little more. If you see a politician at a forum, an open forum, to go and try to get to know that person, you don't necessarily have to pay anything to do that. You make some very good points. And you know, and I understand doctors don't want to talk to their patients about legislation. Some leave brochures, and some will do it vigorously, but I certainly understand reluctance of you perhaps and your colleagues for not really wanting to bring patients into legislative affairs. Maybe there's a more subtle way of doing it, but I think the patients, again, I would say that the best way to get rid of these burdensome regulations, this tsunami of regulations and problems, is that the patients somehow are going to have to feel your pain. And of course they are already, you know that. But we have to perhaps some subtle way, let them know that they're affected. When there's some big-time healthcare legislation, they are affected, and they're not affected in a good way.
Thank you, Mr. Norbeck. We have one last question from Twyla Braze of CCHF.
Thank you, and thank you for that excellent presentation and your passion, I guess, for physicians and patients, and for your call to have the physicians engage with the patients, because that, I believe, is the only way. The headlines will never let them know what's happening, and by the time they know, it'll be too late. My question is really about the AMA. So as far as I know, you know, the membership is very, very low. And can you just give me your sense of why the membership has so diminished, and what the AMA could do to truly bring it back up so that the physicians actually have a voice in Congress that speaks for them and the patient-centric force that they want to be in the exam room and at the bedside?
Please understand that I'm not an expert, and I'm not suggesting to you that I'm any kind of an expert on AMA's membership. I mean, to me, if you look at counties and states, I still very close to state medical societies and counties, especially being on the foundation. And all states and counties, except Tom Garcia in Texas, as I understand, their memberships are going down. I may be wrong, that there may be a few others, but there's only one really going way up in Texas. Maybe Dr. Garcia will tell us how he's able to do that. But I think that it's a new world. I think people, if some people don't go to church because they disagree with an issue, and they don't go to church because of that, how silly, but they do that. They don't support AMA because they disagree on an issue. I think that all is part of it. And today, with the media and the criticism and all of these things, I think all of those come into play. But again, I'm not an expert, far from it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much again, Mr. Norbeck.